The cold December wind howled through the cracks in the barn, biting at Cole Mackenzie's skin as he shuffled to the hayloft. The smell of fresh pine mixed with the scent of the animals. He wasn't expecting company tonight. After all, it was Christmas Eve. The ranch was quiet, as it had been for the past 5 years since the fire took his wife, Abigail, and their unborn child. That tragedy had taken everything from him, leaving only a hollow space in his heart where warmth once lived. No amount of whiskey or hard work could ease the pain, and Cole had learned to bury his emotions, keeping a distance from anyone who might bring those feelings back to the surface. But as he approached the barn door, something caught his eye. A small bundle, wrapped in a faded, tattered blanket, sat beneath the corner of the hayloft, hidden in the shadows. At first, Cole thought it was some trick of the light, but then it moved. Curiosity mixed with caution, he approached slowly, his boots crunching against the ground. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the tiny face staring back at him, wide, innocent eyes fixed on him. A soft cry broke the stillness. Cole knelt down, fear and confusion washing over him. His hand trembled as he reached out, pulling the blanket back to reveal a baby girl. A note fell from the folds of the blanket. "Please love her. Her name is Layla." Cole's chest tightened. What in the world was he supposed to do with this? He glanced around the barn, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the hay bales. But there was no one. No sign of the child's mother. No sign of anything but the baby's fragile presence in his life. He held her close, her tiny body shivering against his chest, as if seeking comfort in the warmth of his arms. His mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who left her here? Why? And most importantly, what was he going to do now? Cole's first instinct was to take the child to the sheriff. But when he arrived in town, the sheriff only confirmed what Cole had feared. There were no reports of missing children, no sign of any foul play. As the hours ticked on, Cole was left with a decision that weighed heavily on his heart. He couldn't turn the baby away. Not after the note, not after the look in her eyes. So, he brought her back to the ranch. The first night with Layla was nothing short of a struggle. She cried almost nonstop, and no matter what Cole tried, he couldn't seem to soothe her. His hands, stiff from years of working with animals, felt clumsy when it came to caring for a child. The rancher had no experience with babies. He had no idea what to do, but he did what he could. He swaddled her in a warm blanket, gave her some milk he'd milked from the cows earlier, and tried to calm her. His mind flashed back to his own loss. The memory of Abigail, her soft voice, the joy they had shared when they first found out they were expecting. The empty space beside him felt like a cruel reminder of everything that had been taken. As the hours passed, he found himself humming an old lullaby that his mother used to sing to him as a child. It was a melody he hadn't thought of in years. And slowly, Layla's cries softened. Her breathing slowed. Her tiny fingers curled around his shirt. Before he knew it, she was asleep, her body warm against his chest. For a moment, Cole allowed himself to relax, a tiny flicker of hope growing in his chest. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could care for this little girl, give her the love and protection she deserved. But the thought was quickly overshadowed by doubt. He had promised himself never to let anyone get too close, never to allow anyone to break through the walls he had built around his heart. He wouldn't let himself feel that kind of pain again. As he watched the baby sleep in his arms, Cole's heart ached with the thought of losing someone else. But deep down, beneath the fear and the doubt, he knew that he had already let Layla in. And for the first time in 5 years, he felt something he had thought was long gone. Something like love. The first month with Layla passed in a blur of sleepless nights, chaotic mornings, and the quiet rhythm of ranch life that Cole had grown accustomed to. The harsh winter weather outside kept him mostly indoors, and with each passing day, he found himself spending more time with the baby, learning the basics of infant care. Mrs. Abernathy, the kindly widow who lived down the road, took it upon herself to teach Cole the finer points of parenting. She would come over every few days, bringing small meals and offering gentle advice. "You're doing fine, Cole," she'd say, patting his back with a smile that was full of warmth. But Cole couldn't shake the feeling that he was stumbling through this. Try his best, but always second-guessing himself. He'd never been a father before, never thought he would be, and now here he was, holding the fragile life of a baby in his hands, unsure of his ability to protect her from the world. It was a struggle at times, especially when Layla would cry, and he couldn't figure out why. Was she hungry? Tired? Too cold? But as the weeks passed, Cole began to get the hang of it, the routine settling into something that resembled normalcy. He would wake early in the morning, feed her, change her, and then go about his chores, working hard on the ranch while Layla napped in the cradle beside him. He crafted small toys for her in the evenings, his rough hands carefully carving wooden animals, a small rocking horse, and a set of blocks. No one knew about the toys except for him and the baby. The town had started to gossip, of course, as small towns are wont to do. People had begun whispering about the lone rancher who had suddenly acquired a baby. Was it his? Was it a relative's? And who had left her there in the barn alone? Cole never gave anyone an answer. He kept to himself, avoiding the town's busybody merchants and curious ranch hands. He didn't want to share Layla with anyone. Not yet. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was fear of letting anyone else close to his little family, or maybe it was because he didn't want to be reminded of what he'd lost all those years ago. That was the thing with small towns. They had a way of prying into your business whether you wanted them to or not. But Cole kept his distance, burying himself in his work and in his new role as a reluctant father. As the days turned into weeks, Cole began to notice the changes in himself. He was no longer the hardened man who had retreated into his grief after Abigail's death. There was something about Layla, something about the way she looked up at him with her big, trusting eyes, that made him want to be better. He wanted to be a good father for her, wanted to protect her from the pain that he had endured. But with that desire came a fear that he might fail her, just as he had failed Abigail. The emotional walls that Cole had spent years building were starting to crack, and he didn't know what to do with the flood of feelings that came with it. He tried to ignore them, burying the tenderness he felt for Layla under a layer of practicality. But every time he saw her smile or heard her laugh, the walls seemed to crumble a little more. He knew that he was getting attached, and that scared him. It scared him because he had already lost so much. He didn't want to risk loving again, not when the possibility of loss was always lingering just out of reach. It was easier to keep his distance, to keep his heart guarded. But Layla wouldn't let him. She was a constant reminder of the love that still lived inside him, the love he thought had died with Abigail. He couldn't fight it, not anymore. One chilly evening in late January, while Cole was tending to the horses, he noticed something strange. There in the snow near the barn were footprints. Not just any footprints, but fresh ones, large and heavy like a man's boots. It was the first time he'd seen tracks like that on his property in weeks. He froze for a moment, his hand resting on the fence as he studied the tracks. His heart pounded in his chest. Had someone been watching him? Had someone seen the baby? He followed the tracks cautiously, his instinct alert, but they led nowhere. They disappeared into the woods, and there was no sign of anyone nearby. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or uneasy. The next morning, after checking the barn and the surrounding area, Cole put it out of his mind. But something told him that the footprints weren't the last sign of trouble. The knock at the door came just as Cole was finishing breakfast, the small kitchen filled with the aroma of fresh coffee. He opened the door to find a woman standing there, her face bruised and her clothes torn, as though she had been through a storm. She looked at him with fear in her eyes, her breath shallow as she tried to catch it. "I'm Margaret Hayes," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm her mother." Cole's stomach twisted at the sound of her words. Her mother? Layla's mother? It didn't make sense. He had never imagined that this day would come, that the woman who had left her daughter in his care would come to take her back. But there she was, standing in front of him, a stranger with a familiar story. She explained quickly, her words tumbling out in a rushed, breathless blur. She had been married to a man named Walter Hayes, a wealthy rancher, but the marriage had been a nightmare from the start. Walter had wanted a son, and when Layla was born, he had flown into a rage, beating Margaret and rejecting the child. Margaret had finally fled, escaping during a terrible blizzard in December, leaving Layla behind because she knew that Cole was a good man. But there was a danger now, a threat that loomed over them. Walter was looking for her, with hired men in tow, and he wouldn't stop until he found her. "He'll kill me," Margaret whispered, "and he'll take Layla." The words hung heavy in the air, and Cole knew that nothing would be the same from that moment on. Margaret's story unfolded in fragments, each piece more heartbreaking than the last. She spoke of the life she had been forced into, the life she never wanted, and the horror she had endured. She was just 16 when she had been married off to Walter Hayes, a man twice her age, wealthy, but cruel. Her parents had sold her into the marriage, thinking it was a good match, a way to secure their future. Walter was the kind of man who saw women as possessions, as things to be controlled. From the very beginning, he had made it clear that he expected a son. Margaret had been young, naive, and hopeful that maybe, just maybe, this arranged marriage would be a chance for her to find some kind of happiness. But those hopes were quickly shattered when she found herself pregnant. She had prayed for a healthy child, hoping that her husband's coldness would thaw if they had a son. But when the baby turned out to be a girl, Walter's reaction was explosive. He raged for days, blaming Margaret for not giving him the son he so desperately wanted. His anger only grew when Layla was born, and instead of celebrating the miracle of life, Walter saw only failure. Margaret tried to protect her daughter, to shield her from his wrath, but every day brought new threats, new beatings. Walter became more violent, more unpredictable. His mood swings were terrifying, and Margaret, in her desperate attempt to survive, learned to walk on eggshells around him. She became a shadow in her own home, always fearful of making him angry. But nothing she did seemed to make a difference. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't please him. And when she gave birth to Layla, that was the final straw for Walter. He turned his anger not just on her, but on their infant daughter. He would scream at her, calling her a disappointment, a burden. Margaret felt helpless. She had never been given the power to make decisions for herself, and now, trapped in this marriage, she felt utterly powerless. One night, after one of Walter's rages, she knew she had to leave. She couldn't stay any longer. She couldn't bear to see Layla grow up in that kind of environment, to become the victim of Walter's cruelty. The thought of what Walter might do to her daughter if he ever found out about her escape filled her with terror. So, she waited for the storm to pass, then fled in the middle of a December blizzard, taking only what she could carry. She didn't know where to go. She didn't know who would help her, but she knew she had to get away. She had to find safety for herself and for Layla. When she reached Cole's ranch, she had no plan. She was barely surviving, physically and emotionally drained. But she had heard stories about Cole Mackenzie, a man who had suffered loss and heartache, but who was known to be a good man, a man who could be trusted. And in her desperation, she had left Layla at his barn, hoping, praying that he would care for her, that he would give her the love that Walter was incapable of giving. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Margaret had always dreamed of being a mother, of raising her child in a safe, loving home, but Walter had robbed her of that dream. She had never wanted to give up her daughter, but leaving her behind was the only way to protect her. She thought about Layla every moment, wondering if she was safe, if she was being cared for, but she knew she couldn't go back. Walter was dangerous, and he would stop at nothing to get her back, to punish her for leaving him, for taking his daughter away. Margaret had no choice but to hide, to live in constant fear of being found. She didn't even know if Cole would keep her daughter or if he would turn her away. But she had to take the chance. She had to believe that someone, anyone, would help. Her heart twisted in her chest as she spoke the words, "Walter's searching for me. He'll kill me and take Layla for his ego." The fear in her voice was unmistakable. She knew the kind of man Walter was. He was ruthless, controlling, and he would do anything to get what he wanted. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she recounted how she had heard whispers of Walter's hired man, how they had been asking around, searching for her. She could hear the urgency in her voice, the raw emotion that came with the fear of losing her daughter. "I had to leave," Margaret continued, wiping her eyes. "He's not just looking for me. He's after Layla too. He'll hurt her just to prove a point, to show that he's still in control. I couldn't let that happen." Cole felt the weight of her words, the desperation in her tone. He wanted to help, wanted to protect them both, but he knew that Walter Hayes was a dangerous man, and if he came to the ranch looking for Margaret, there would be hell to pay. The thought of having to face off with a man like Walter sent a chill down his spine. He had been through so much already, lost so much, and the thought of losing Layla, the baby who had brought some light back in his life, was more than he could bear. But he also knew that Margaret couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to act. They had to come up with a plan, and fast. He couldn't keep hiding from the world forever. And if Walter was coming, then they needed to be ready. It was then that Cole made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't let Margaret face this alone. He couldn't let her go back to Walter. They would fight. They would protect Layla, and they would keep her safe. But there was no time to waste. The danger was already closing in. The sound of horses outside broke the silence in the room. The danger had arrived. The knocking at the door was just the beginning of what was to come. The days following Margaret's revelation were filled with tension, fear, and a growing sense of urgency. Cole couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made him jump, as though at any moment Walter's hired men could burst through the door. Margaret, despite her efforts to remain composed, was a nervous wreck. The weight of the fear she carried was evident in the way her eyes darted about the room, the way she flinched at every noise. The barn, which had once felt like a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a trap, a place where they were all waiting for something terrible to happen. Cole knew that staying in the open wasn't an option anymore. They couldn't wait for Walter to come knocking on their door. If they were going to survive, they had to make a plan, and they had to act fast. The decision was made to keep Margaret hidden in the barn loft, a place where no one would think to look, at least not immediately. It was an old part of the barn that was mostly forgotten, a dusty space where hay bales had long ago piled up. From there, they could watch over Layla and keep out of sight, at least until they figured out their next move. Cole made sure to board up the windows in the barn and place some heavy crates in front of the door, so that it would be difficult for anyone to get inside unnoticed. Every night, he would check the perimeter of the ranch, listening for any sign of movement beyond the fence. The quiet of the ranch had always been comforting to him, but now, with the constant threat of danger hanging over them, that same silence felt oppressive. As the days passed, Margaret began to help as much as she could. Though she was physically weak from the trauma she had endured, her spirit was strong, and Cole could see the determination in her eyes as she worked beside him, doing whatever she could to make their situation more manageable. She had insisted on learning how to shoot, saying that she needed to be able to protect herself and Layla if the worst came to pass. It wasn't easy for her. Margaret had never fired a gun before, and the weight of it in her hands felt foreign. But Cole patiently taught her, showing her how to aim and fire, how to take care of the weapon and keep it clean. He could see the change in her as she grew more confident, more capable. It was as though the more she learned, the more control she took over her own fate, and that gave her a sense of power she hadn't known since the days before her marriage to Walter. As much as Cole wanted to keep her out of harm's way, he knew that this wasn't just about protecting Layla anymore. This was about survival, about standing up to the man who had tormented her for so long. Margaret wasn't going to run anymore. She was going to fight. With every passing day, Cole found himself growing more fond of her. It wasn't just her strength that drew him to her. It was the way she cared for Layla, the way she would coo to her softly when she thought no one was looking, the way she comforted the child when she was upset. Cole had never thought much about love after Abigail, but now, seeing Margaret with Layla, seeing the way she had stepped up to protect her daughter, he couldn't help but feel something stir inside him. It wasn't just a protective instinct. It was something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. But Cole pushed those feelings aside. He couldn't afford to get distracted. They had bigger problems now. As the days wore on, they continued to prepare. Cole made sure to stockpile supplies, gathering food, water, and anything else they might need in case they had to flee. The mountain trails surrounding the ranch had always been his secret escape route, paths that he knew like the back of his hand. He mapped out the quickest route out of town, the one that would take them high into the mountains, far from the reach of Walter and his men. But Cole knew that their escape would be anything but easy. The weather was unpredictable in the winter, and the mountain trails could be treacherous. One misstep could send them tumbling into the ravines below, and Cole couldn't afford to let that happen. As he prepared, Cole couldn't shake the thought of Walter's arrival. He knew that Walter wouldn't stop at anything to get his wife and daughter back. The man was driven by his ego, his need to control, and he wouldn't let a little thing like a failed marriage stand in his way. The worst part of it all was that Walter was smart. He wasn't some bumbling fool who would make a lot of noise about his plans. He would be careful, methodical, and he would have a whole team of men at his disposal. The thought of facing them in an open fight sent a shiver down Cole's spine, but he refused to back down. The baby, Layla, needed him. Margaret needed him. And now, more than ever, he was determined to be the man they both needed. One afternoon, as Cole was finishing his work in the barn, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A figure standing just beyond the fence, watching him. It was too far away to make out clearly, but the man's silhouette was unmistakable. He had the posture of someone who had been standing there for a long time, waiting, watching. Cole's heart raced, and he instinctively moved toward the back of the barn, out of sight. Whoever this man was, he was too close for comfort. With Margaret still in the loft, he couldn't afford to make any noise. His mind raced, calculating the best course of action. He knew the trails were the safest escape, but it would be impossible to make it without being spotted if they stayed on the main roads. Walter's men had probably already scouted out the area, and Cole wasn't about to give them any advantage. He motioned for Margaret to stay silent, then quickly grabbed the rifle he kept in the corner of the barn, positioning himself behind some crates. His heart beat in his ears as he waited. The figure didn't seem to move. Cole's instincts told him that this was no ordinary passerby. This was someone looking for something or someone. For a long moment, everything was still. Then, the figure turned and began walking away, heading back toward the tree line. Cole waited a few more minutes to make sure the man wasn't coming back, then slowly made his way back to the loft to check on Margaret. He couldn't take any chances. They were running out of time. The danger was closing in. That night, Cole sat by the fire, his mind swirling with the possibilities. Walter Hayes was coming. Cole knew it was only a matter of time before he made his move. They had to be ready. The next morning, Cole did what he had to do. He prepared for their escape. Margaret, despite her fear, was ready to follow him wherever he led. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she and Layla could find safety. They could find peace, but it wouldn't come without a fight. And Cole was ready to fight, ready to protect them both, ready to protect the family he had never asked for, but the family he now couldn't imagine living without. The choice was made. That night they would leave. As night descended upon the ranch, the air grew colder, and the sense of urgency in Cole's chest pressed harder, more suffocating. The escape had to happen tonight. There were no other options. He had mapped out the quickest route through the mountains, a winding trail that led through dense pine forests and jagged ridgelines. It was a treacherous path, especially in winter, but it was the only route that could take them far enough away from Walter Hayes and his hired guns. Cole had done his best to prepare, packing what little they could carry, bundling Layla in warm blankets, and keeping his rifle close. But as he looked around the barn one last time, his heart heavy with the weight of what they were about to do, he couldn't shake the fear gnawing at him. The baby, Layla, had been quiet all evening, as though she too understood that something was wrong. Margaret, though exhausted from the constant tension, moved silently, gathering her things and making sure the barn was as secure as possible. Her hand shook as she packed Layla's tiny belongings, what little they had. "Do you think we'll make it?" Margaret asked quietly, her voice laced with doubt, as she glanced toward the dimly lit mountain path outside. Cole looked at her, his expression unreadable but firm. "We have to," he said, his voice low but steady. "We don't have a choice." The words felt heavy, more so than he wanted them to, but it was the truth. If they didn't leave now, Walter would find them, and when he did, there would be no escaping. They would never be free. After a final glance at the ranch, Cole led the way out of the barn, Margaret close behind, carrying Layla in her arms. The cold air bit at their skin as they made their way to the woods, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of snow on the ground. The night was pitch black, save for the moonlight filtering through the clouds. Every crack of a twig beneath their boots, every gust of wind that whispered through the trees made Cole's heart race. He kept looking back, as if he expected Walter's men to be right on their heels. They had to make it to the mountain pass. They couldn't stop now. Cole's breath came in shallow puffs as he pushed ahead, his mind running through every possible scenario. But he refused to let fear take over. Fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. They needed to stay calm, stay focused. The trail was difficult to follow, the snow deeper than he had anticipated, and the biting wind made it harder to see ahead. Layla's whimper from Margaret's arms sent a pang of guilt through Cole's chest. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be all right, but the words felt hollow. He had no guarantees, but he couldn't afford to fail. Not now, not when they were so close to freedom. For hours they trekked through the mountains, Cole leading the way, Margaret trailing behind. The cold was unbearable, the wind howling through the trees, and the path was treacherous, sometimes narrowing so much that they had to squeeze through tight spaces in the rocks. Cole was painfully aware of the vulnerability of their situation. If they got caught in the open, there would be no way out. He had been on these trails before, hunting and trapping, but never like this, never with so much at stake. Every time they stopped to catch their breath, Cole would scan the surrounding woods, his heart racing with the thought of being discovered. They couldn't afford to make a sound. They couldn't risk alerting Walter's men. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped even further, and Cole could see his breath mist in the cold air. The climb was getting steeper, and every step felt like it took more effort than the last. He knew they had to find shelter soon, or they risked freezing before morning. Margaret was struggling too, her face pale from exhaustion and the cold, but she didn't complain. She kept her focus on Layla, her arms wrapped tightly around the baby to keep her warm. But even as Margaret tried to stay strong, Cole could see the fear in her eyes. She was terrified, not just for herself, but for Layla and for Cole. She was depending on him, trusting him to get them out of this mess. That thought weighed heavily on him. As the hours stretched on, their progress slowed. Cole knew they needed to find shelter soon, but the mountain trail seemed to go on forever. The snow had thickened, and now they were trudging through drifts that reached up to their knees. Margaret's footsteps had slowed, her breathing coming in ragged gasps. Cole stopped and turned to her. "We can't stop now," he urged, his voice softer now, despite the urgency. "We need to keep moving." But Margaret shook her head, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I can't go any further," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm too tired, Cole. I'm scared." Cole's heart broke for her, for all that she had been through. He had promised to protect her, but how could he when they were both so exhausted? He glanced around, his mind racing for a solution. They couldn't stop here. They would freeze. But if they kept going, they might collapse from exhaustion. Then in the distance, Cole spotted something, a dark shape against the snow. It was an old, abandoned mining cabin, barely visible in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. "Margaret," Cole said, his voice filled with hope. "There's a cabin up ahead, just a little further." She looked at him, her eyes wide with relief. "Please hurry." They pushed forward, slowly but steadily, and after what felt like an eternity, they reached the cabin. It was small, with a sagging roof and one broken window, but it was a shelter nonetheless. Cole shoved open the door and stepped inside, relieved to find that it was mostly intact. The cabin smelled of old wood and dampness, but it was warm compared to the freezing temperatures outside. Margaret collapsed onto the floor, still holding Layla, her body shaking with exhaustion. Cole moved quickly, building a fire in the small stove, his hands working with practiced efficiency as he set up a small bed for Margaret and Layla in the corner. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Once the fire was going, he helped Margaret to her feet and guided her to the makeshift bed. He wrapped Layla in blankets, making sure she was warm. As the warmth of the fire began to spread through the cabin, Cole allowed himself a moment to breathe. But the moment didn't last long. There was a sound, a noise outside, a soft thud, a horse's hoof striking the snow. Cole froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out the window, but the storm outside made it impossible to see clearly. The danger was closing in. They hadn't made it far enough. Walter's men were coming. A chill ran down Cole's spine as he realized the worst-case scenario had arrived. He needed to act, and fast. He motioned for Margaret to stay down and moved toward the back of the cabin, his rifle in hand. The sound outside grew louder, footsteps now, heavy and deliberate. The wind howled through the trees, masking any noise they might have made, but it also made it harder to hear their pursuers. Cole's thoughts raced. There was no time for hesitation. They needed to move again, or they'd be trapped. They couldn't fight Walter's men, not with just the three of them. He couldn't let them take Margaret, couldn't let them take Layla. He couldn't fail them. Cole made his decision. He turned to Margaret, his voice low but urgent. "Get Layla, and stay close to me. We're leaving now." Margaret's eyes filled with fear, but she nodded, her face pale but determined. She reached for Layla, clutching her tightly in her arms. The fire in the stove crackled as they made their way toward the door, their movements slow but deliberate. The cabin's door creaked as Cole opened it, and the cold night air rushed in, biting at their skin. The time for running was now. The game had changed, and the fight for survival had only just begun. The cold air hit them like a slap to the face as Cole pushed the door open, his eyes quickly scanning the dark expanse of the mountain pass outside. He could hear the crunching of snow underfoot and the rustle of branches swaying in the wind, but nothing else. The quiet was deafening, an eerie calm that only heightened the tension in his chest. He motioned for Margaret to stay close, his hand on her arm as he carefully stepped out into the snow. Layla, wrapped tightly in the blankets, whimpered in her sleep, oblivious to the danger that loomed over them. Margaret, her face drawn with exhaustion, kept a firm grip on the baby, her eyes darting nervously to the distant shadows of the trees. Cole could feel his pulse racing as he scanned the terrain. Every instinct told him they were being watched. Walter's men had to be close by. They had been tracking them for days, and now, with the storm masking their movements, they had no time to waste. They couldn't stay in the cabin any longer. They had to keep moving. The mountain pass was their only chance, but it was a dangerous gamble. The path was narrow, the snow deep, and the wind made it hard to hear any approaching sounds. But Cole had no choice. He led the way, moving quickly but quietly, his boots sinking into the fresh snow as he pushed through the trees. He had to get them to safety, away from the men who would stop at nothing to bring them back to Walter. Margaret followed behind, her steps faltering but determined. Every so often, she would glance over her shoulder, her face pale with worry, but she didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They had already said their goodbyes to safety, to the life they had known before Walter's pursuit. All they had now was each other and the hope that they could escape. The wind howled louder as they moved higher up the mountain, the air thin and bitter. The trail became steeper, more treacherous, and Cole's heart pounded in his chest as they climbed. Margaret was struggling to keep up, her breath coming in short gasps, but she refused to stop. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. Every step took more effort, and Cole could feel the cold creeping in his bones. But he pushed forward, his focus solely on getting them through this. After what felt like hours, they reached a ridge that overlooked the valley below. The storm had picked up in intensity, the wind whipping the snow into a frenzy. Cole knew that they were close to the mountain's edge, but there was no sign of Walter's men. For a brief moment, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. Maybe they had lost them. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this alive. But the moment was fleeting. A sharp crack of a branch broke the silence, and Cole's heart skipped a beat. He turned quickly, his hand reaching for the rifle slung across his back. He knew that sound, the unmistakable crunch of boots in the snow. They weren't alone. Cole's eyes scanned the ridge, but it was too late. A group of men, their faces obscured by scarves and hoods, appeared from the shadows, moving quickly toward them. The moment they stepped into view, Cole knew they had been spotted. Walter's men had found them. Panic surged in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. They had no choice now. They couldn't outrun them, and there was nowhere to hide. They had to fight. Cole turned to Margaret, his voice low but urgent. "Run now," he ordered, his eyes locked onto hers. Margaret hesitated for a moment, but she nodded, her face filled with fear. She turned and started running, Layla's blanket billowing behind her as she sprinted for the cover of the trees. Cole's heart hammered in his chest as he raised his rifle, his eyes narrowing on the approaching men. The storm had made it hard to see, but he knew he had no time to waste. He took a deep breath and aimed, firing a shot into the darkness. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the mountain pass, the blast of it drowning out everything else. One of the men stumbled, a cry of pain escaping his lips as he fell to the ground. The others froze for a moment, shocked by the sudden attack, but they quickly recovered, pulling their own guns from their holsters. Cole didn't wait. He fired again, this time hitting another man in the leg. The man crumpled to the ground, his face contorted in pain. But they kept coming. The remaining men charged forward, their weapons raised. Cole knew they had to keep moving. They couldn't stay here, not with so many of them closing in. He sprinted after Margaret, the snow crunching beneath his boots as he ran. The wind was brutal, pushing against him, but he kept his focus on the one goal, getting them out of here alive. He caught up to Margaret just as she reached the edge of the trees. "Keep going," he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a narrow gap between two large boulders. They had to find shelter, somewhere to hide until they could regroup. But just as they ducked behind the boulders, another shot rang out, a bullet whizzing past Cole's head. He felt the rush of air as it narrowly missed him. The sound of gunfire filled the air, sharp and deafening. They were trapped. Cole could feel the panic rising in his chest, but he fought it back, focusing on the situation at hand. He knew they had to hold their ground. Margaret was huddled beside him, clutching Layla tightly to her chest, her face pale and tear-streaked. Cole could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. She wasn't going to let them take her daughter. She wasn't going to let them take him. Cole pulled her behind the boulder, his mind racing. He had to end this. He had to protect them. He peered around the edge of the rock, looking for the men. They were moving closer, their guns aimed at the trees where Cole and Margaret were hiding. There was no way out. The boulders provided some cover, but not enough. And then, In that moment of pure desperation, Cole heard a familiar sound, a sound he hadn't expected. The sound of horses. He spun around, his heart leaping in his chest. A group of riders appeared on the ridge above them, riding fast. The sound of galloping hooves grew louder as the riders approached. For a moment, Cole couldn't believe his eyes. It was Mrs. Abernathy, with a posse of ranch hands, their guns drawn and ready. They had come to help. The sight of them was enough to give Cole the boost he needed. "Margaret, get down," he shouted, pushing her to the ground as he aimed his rifle at the men approaching. The cavalry had arrived, and they were ready for a fight. The gunfight that followed was chaos. Shots rang out, and the sound of screams filled the air as the two sides clashed. Cole's heart pounded in his chest as he fired, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He could see Margaret, her face determined as she crouched low behind the boulder, keeping Layla safe. And then, in the middle of the chaos, Cole saw him, Walter, the man who had caused all this, the man who had torn Margaret's life apart. Walter was standing at the back of his group, his face twisted in rage as he barked orders to his men. It was time to end this. Cole fired once more, aiming directly at Walter's chest. The shot rang out, and Walter fell, a look of shock on his face as he crumpled to the ground. The remaining men hesitated, their eyes wide with disbelief. The battle was over. Walter Hayes was done. The sheriff's posse, led by Mrs. Abernathy, quickly rounded up the remaining men, their guns lowered now that their leader was gone. The danger had passed, but the price had been high. Cole's heart was racing, his body shaking with the aftermath of the fight. But it was done. They were safe. The snow had stopped falling, and the wind had died down. The world around them was quiet again, the only sound the distant rustle of trees. Margaret, still trembling, reached out for Layla, pulling the baby into her arms as if to reassure herself that she was truly safe. Cole knelt beside them, his hand resting gently on Margaret's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "We made it," she whispered. "We made it." For the first time in years, Cole felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had made it, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found a future. The months that followed the confrontation with Walter Hayes were a blur of change, transformation, and healing. The first sign of spring was a welcome relief after the harsh winter, bringing with it a fresh hope that had been absent for far too long. The trees began to bud, the earth softened underfoot, and the cold winds of the mountains began to subside, leaving behind the warmth of the sun. It was a time of rebirth, not just for nature, but for Cole, Margaret, and Layla. They had survived the most dangerous chapter of their lives, but now they were starting anew, creating a life for themselves far removed from the horrors of their past. 2 weeks after Walter's arrest, they found themselves settling into a rhythm. The ranch, which had once felt like a lonely place, now felt like home. Margaret had started planting a garden by the house, her hands gently working the soil. Each seed she planted a symbol of the new life they were building. The garden flourished in the spring warmth. Just as Margaret's own heart had begun to heal, the trauma of her past slowly giving way to the light of hope. It was a healing process, one that took time and patience. But Margaret was determined to rebuild, to give herself and Layla the life they deserved. Her hands, which had once trembled with fear, now moved with confidence and purpose as she nurtured the plants that would feed them. She planted roses, lavender, and herbs around the house, each flower a promise of better days to come. For the first time in years, she was able to look at her life without the looming shadow of Walter's cruelty hanging over her. Cole, too, had changed. His stoic, guarded nature had softened over the months. Layla, with her constant smile and innocent laughter, had brought a light into his life that he never thought possible. He spent hours in the evenings, sitting by the fire, playing with her as she giggled and reached for the toys he had made. Cole had become a father in every sense of the word, though the role still felt new to him. But with each passing day, it felt more natural. The empty space he had carried inside him since Abigail's death was now filled with love, a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of places. He had never believed that he could love again, but Layla had taught him that love wasn't something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. In the mornings, Cole and Margaret worked together, taking care of the land and the animals. Their days were filled with simple tasks, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and mending the roof. They were building something together, something lasting. As Cole worked, he found himself looking at Margaret differently. Her strength, her resilience, and the love she had for Layla had drawn him in, and he realized, somewhere along the way, that he had fallen in love with her. It wasn't the kind of love that came in grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was quiet, steady, the kind of love that grew over time, nurtured by the simple acts of care and kindness they showed each other every day. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Cole and Margaret sat on the porch, watching Layla toddle around the yard. Margaret leaned her head on Cole's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "It's hard to believe it's only been a few months," she said softly. "It feels like a lifetime." Cole nodded, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I wouldn't change a thing. We've come a long way." Margaret smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I never thought I'd be here, Cole. I never thought I'd have a chance at happiness again." He looked at her, his heart swelling with love. "You deserve it, Margaret. You deserve all the happiness in the world." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of the wind through the trees and the distant chirping of birds. In that moment, everything felt right. The world was quiet, the past was behind them, and the future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. But even as they enjoyed this moment of peace, Cole knew there was something he needed to do. There was a question he had been carrying in his heart since the day they had first found each other. He turned to Margaret, his eyes serious. "Margaret," he said softly, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." She looked up at him, her eyes full of curiosity. "What is it?" Cole took a deep breath, his hand reaching for hers. "I've been thinking about this for a while. You and Layla, you've both brought me more joy than I ever thought possible. You've helped me heal in ways I never imagined." Margaret's eyes softened as she listened, her heart beginning to race. "Cole, what are you saying?" He squeezed her hand gently, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm asking you to marry me, Margaret. I want to build a life with you. I want to give Layla a family, a home filled with love and safety." Margaret's breath caught in her throat, her heart skipping a beat. She had never expected this, never thought she would find love again, let alone the kind of love that Cole offered. She had seen the way he had cared for Layla, how he had put his own pain aside to give her a future. And now, as she looked at him, she knew that she could trust him with her heart. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." The words hung in the air, sweet and simple, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, as though afraid that if he let go, this moment would slip away. "You won't regret this, Margaret," he whispered against her hair. "I'll give you everything I have." Margaret pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her eyes filled with love. "You already have, Cole. You've already given me everything." As the days passed, the preparations for the wedding began. It wasn't a grand affair. There was no need for extravagance. It was simple and intimate, just the way they both wanted it. Mrs. Abernathy helped with the arrangements, and a few of the ranch hands from the area came to lend their support. The ceremony was held at the small church in town, where the local preacher had agreed to officiate. On the morning of the wedding, Cole stood outside the church, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined this moment, never thought he would be standing here, waiting to marry someone again. But here he was, with Margaret by his side, ready to start a new chapter of their lives together. As Margaret walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with his, and he felt a surge of emotion that he couldn't put into words. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he had ever seen her, and he couldn't believe that she was standing here with him, ready to become his wife. The ceremony was brief, but filled with meaning. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. As they kissed at the altar, the church erupted in applause, and the small congregation cheered. It was a moment of pure joy, a celebration of love, and it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. That evening, the town gathered at the ranch for a simple reception. There was food, laughter, and dancing under the stars. For the first time in years, Cole felt at peace. He had found his family, his future, and his purpose. As they danced together, Margaret's head resting on his shoulder, Cole whispered, "I never thought I could have this again. But here we are." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I never thought I could either," she said softly. "But we're here, together." The future seemed bright, full of promise, and Cole knew that, no matter what came their way, they would face it together, with love, with hope, and with Layla, the little girl who had brought them all together. The ranch, once a place of sorrow, was now a place of laughter and joy, a home that Cole, Margaret, and Layla had built with their own hands and hearts. And as they danced under the stars, Cole realized that this was the life he had always wanted, even if he hadn't known it until now. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that everything was going to be okay. They had made it through the storm, and now they were ready to embrace the sunshine. The future was theirs. It was bright. The love they had found, against all odds, was a love that would last forever. And for that, Cole was grateful. Grateful for the family he never thought he'd have. Grateful for the second chance at life and love that had been given to him. Grateful for Layla's gift. The next Christmas was almost identical to the one they had shared a year before, but this time, everything felt different. The barn that had once been the place of Layla's abandonment was now a symbol of hope, of a new beginning. It was the same place where Cole had found the abandoned baby that had changed everything, but now it stood as the heart of a home filled with love, laughter, and warmth. Margaret, now pregnant with her second child, stood at the kitchen counter, her hands gently cradling her swollen belly. The faint glow of the Christmas lights outside flickered through the windows, casting a soft, golden hue across the room. Layla, now walking and talking, was playing by the fireplace, her tiny feet pattering against the wooden floors as she carefully stacked blocks with the concentration of someone far older. Cole watched them both, his heart swelling with emotion. A year ago, his life had been shrouded in grief, loneliness, and loss. Now, it was filled with the joy of family, the kind of family he had thought he would never have again. As Cole sat down by the fire, his mind drifted back to the Christmas night when he had found Layla in the barn, to the fear and uncertainty that had gripped him in those early days. He had never imagined that one decision, one simple act of kindness, would lead him to the life he had now. He picked up the old note that had been left with Layla when she was abandoned, a note that had become a symbol of the love he had promised to give to her. "Please love her. Her name is Layla." He traced the familiar handwriting with his fingers, the words a gentle reminder of how far they had come. Margaret entered the room, her smile warm as she sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "You're thinking about the past again, aren't you?" she asked softly, her voice filled with understanding. Cole nodded, his eyes never leaving the note. "I can't help it," he said. "It feels like a lifetime ago, but sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday." Margaret leaned in closer, her head resting against his shoulder. "I know," she whispered. "But look at us now, Cole. Look at what we built." He looked at her, at the warmth and love in her eyes, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the joy that had entered his life. "We've come a long way," he said softly. "We've come a long way." Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, the warmth of their home filled every corner. Layla toddled over to them, her little hand reaching up for Cole's. "Dada," she said, her voice soft but clear, as if she had just learned the word. Cole's heart melted as he bent down to pick her up, holding her close. Margaret's eyes shone with tears as she watched them. "She's growing so fast," she said quietly. "It's hard to believe she's already a year old." "I know," Cole replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It feels like just yesterday that she was in my arms for the first time." He looked at Layla, her bright eyes full of wonder, and he knew that she was the reason he had found the strength to move on, to love again. She had brought him out of the darkness, and now she was the light of his life. He kissed her forehead and then turned to Margaret. "We've made it, haven't we?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening. "Yes, we have," she replied, her hand resting on her belly. "And this little one is going to be part of it, too." Cole's heart swelled as he looked at Margaret, his life, and their family. This was the future he had always wanted, but never thought he could have. And it was here, in this small, humble home, surrounded by the people he loved, that he had found his place. As the night wore on, they sat together by the fire, sharing stories and laughter, the bond between them stronger than ever. The past, with all its pain and loss, was behind them. They had come through the storm, and now they were living in the sunlight. Cole looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape, the world peaceful and still. He thought about the journey they had taken, the struggles they had faced, and how far they had come. They had all been broken in some way. Cole by the loss of his wife and child, Margaret by her abusive marriage to Walter, and Layla by the abandonment she had suffered. But through love, they had healed, and now they were whole. It was in this moment, as they sat together, their family complete, that Cole realized something. Love doesn't need to be earned or deserved. It just needs to be accepted. They had all found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and now they were bound together by a love that was pure and unbreakable. The barn that had once been a place of sorrow had become a home filled with hope, laughter, and joy. It was the symbol of their new beginning, a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. As Cole held Layla close, Margaret resting her head on his shoulder, he couldn't help but smile. "Layla taught me to love again," he whispered softly, his heart full of gratitude. He kissed her on the forehead, a promise to protect her always. "And I'll love you forever." The future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibilities. They had faced the darkest of times and come out the other side stronger than ever. Now, as a family, they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. And as Cole watched the snow fall softly outside, he knew that no matter what happened, they would be okay. They had found each other, and that was all that mattered. They were a family, and that was enough.